This is part 2, looking at inclusion versus segregation, or pull-out for students with special needs. I'm looking at some of the problems with segregated instruction, and yes, I'm sitting at home in my t-shirt talking to you. First of all, know that what I say is based on something. I'm not just blowing smoke out my nostrils. I try to be well-informed and use research to the greatest degree possible. These are some of the sources I use. I highly recommend this book by Peterson and Heidi, and I've put a picture of that. It gives a wonderful review of the literature, and it gives some wonderful strategies for inclusive teaching. First of all, quick overview. The common treatment in special education is to pull students out, to send them down the hall someplace or a special room, to pull out classes, to segregate them from the general population. The idea was to slow it down so students could catch up. Slow down instruction, make it slower so that they could catch up. But do they ever catch up? Is there research to support the effectiveness of slow it down, of segregation? Now, when we look at segregation versus inclusion, we have to ask, do they accelerate students' growth when compared to an inclusive classroom? An inclusive classroom, again, has students with special needs to the greatest degree possible in a general ed setting and differentiates the curriculum to include them or to meet everyone's special needs. What I have found, what the research points to above, is that quality instruction in an inclusive general education classroom is at least as effective in some cases, but more effective than most cases than segregated instruction. More effective in terms of skills and achievement, much more effective in terms of learning social skills and becoming socialized. There is a body of research to support that. Now, this idea, segregated with learning disabilities. Segregation keeps students with special needs apart from other students for instruction. The idea is that this is what's good for them, and that's based on an idea, but not necessarily a body of research. What happens is they tend to get a lot of drill and practice on sub-skills. As I've said, this tends to be based on I think-isms. I think this makes sense versus solid research. It has been done for so many years, it becomes ingrained, and we think it is the best practice. It just makes common sense. But we use research to get beyond common sense, because common sense is not always what research says. At one period, it was common sense. Of course, you have an illness, you put a leech on it. That just makes common sense. But that's why we use science to give us an objective lens on reality. Now, the common argument, we create experimental groups, treatment groups, and comparison groups. One group gets explicit phonics instruction, and this is the common type of research used to justify segregation. One group gets explicit instruction in some little subskill called phonics. Now, phonics is important. I'm not saying it's not. We'll get into that. The other group does not get phonics instruction, the control group. So, of course, when you compare the two groups on tests of phonics instruction, the treatment group is going to test better than the control group. But the question is, does this drill and practice in phonics instruction that occurs often outside a meaningful context, does that improve their ability to create meaning with print, which is what reading does? And in the long term, 2 and 3 years down the line, does it have any effect on their ability to read and comprehend material? As well, is the research, if it is to be good research comparing inclusion versus mainstreaming, or inclusion versus segregation, it must look at pull-out segregation versus inclusion, high-quality inclusive classrooms, and not mainstreaming. It must look at teachers who have the background knowledge and skills to deliver effective, quality, inclusive instruction and strategies in a gen ed classroom. And as I said before, mainstreaming is different from inclusion. Mainstreaming is just dumping the kids into a gen ed classroom and trying to bring them up to speed. And that is not an effective way. All right, part 2, problems with segregated instruction. Inclusion, good. Mainstreaming, not good. Segregation, big question mark. The jury is still out.